Stadium Fall, Mexico. A 2026 World Cup preparatory friendly arrived at Estadio Azteca carrying the full weight of the tournament's history. The stadium, situated in the Pedregal de San Angel district of Mexico City, is one of the most recognized sporting venues on the planet. It had hosted World Cup finals before. It had seen Pelé, Maradona, and decades of matches that defined the sport. Ahead of the 2026 tournament, it was back on the global stage, testing its readiness as one of the host venues for competition spread across 3 countries and dozens of cities. Tens of thousands of fans filled its tiered stands for each fixture, and the atmosphere it generated on match days was unlike almost any other stadium in the world. The seating structure at Azteca is layered, with multiple tiers rising steeply above the pitch. The upper sections offer expansive views, but sit at significant height above the lower levels and the areas surrounding the stadium. The box seating areas occupy elevated positions within that tiered structure, with the second-level boxes positioned above the first level, separated by a drop that under normal circumstances no spectator would have any reason to cross. On the day of this match, a fan had made his way into the second-level box area. He was intoxicated. The match had not yet kicked off. What he was attempting and why was captured in the outcome that followed, rather than in any announced intention. At some point before the opening whistle, he moved toward the edge of the second-level box area and attempted to climb down to the first level below. The climb went wrong. He fell. He did not land on another seating section. He fell past the first level and landed in the car park below the seating structure. The distance between where he started and where he landed was enough to make the outcome immediately serious. Emergency responders were contacted and attended the scene. The precise timeline of the medical response, including how quickly personnel arrived and what specific interventions were attempted, was not publicly disclosed in detail. What was confirmed is that he did not survive. The exact cause of death was not disclosed beyond the fall itself and its consequences. He died as a result of coming down from that height onto the surface of the car park below the stands. The match went ahead as scheduled. It ended in a goalless draw. The result was recorded as a friendly. The teams moved on with their preparations, and the wait for the 2026 World Cup continued. Below the stands, before a single minute of football had been played, a man had already died. Flag in wheel. On the 19th of December 2022, Argentina won the World Cup. The final, played in Lusail, Qatar, went to a penalty shootout after finishing 2-2 following extra time, with Argentina defeating France in one of the most closely contested finals in the tournament's history. Lionel Messi lifted the trophy. It was the culmination of decades of national yearning, a win that had been anticipated, delayed, and finally delivered. For Argentinians, it was not simply a football result, it was something closer to collective release. The streets of Argentina filled immediately. Cities across the country, Buenos Aires most visibly but far from uniquely, became rivers of blue and white. Motorcycles moved through the crowds in their thousands. People draped themselves in flags. The national flag, blue and white with the sun emblem at its center, appeared on every surface, worn, waved, tied, and in the case of many riders that night, caped around the shoulders and worn like a garment as riders moved through the celebrating streets. A 22-year-old man was among those celebrating on a motorcycle. He was riding through the streets with an Argentina flag draped around his neck and shoulders, the way thousands of other fans wore theirs that night. It was not unusual. Flags worn as capes were everywhere. The streets were full of people doing exactly what he was doing, riding and celebrating with the flag against their skin, the fabric flowing behind them. At some point during his ride, the edge of the flag reached the rear wheel of the motorcycle. The wheel caught the fabric. It pulled. The flag, which had been loosely draped over his shoulders, went taut in an instant. The momentum of the wheel drawing the fabric and applied force directly to the material wrapped around his neck. The flag tightened. It strangled him. The mechanism was immediate and severe. A rear wheel rotating at speed, catching a trailing length of fabric and reeling it inward generates force very quickly. The flag did not simply catch and tear. It cinched. The movement of the wheel and the movement of the motorcycle worked together to pull the fabric tight around his throat before any corrective action could interrupt the sequence. The chaos of a mass celebration on the streets of Argentina complicated what came next. The streets were not clear. They were not orderly. They were packed with people in states of celebration, on foot, on motorcycles, and vehicles, with noise and movement in every direction. Emergency services in that environment faced conditions that were not straightforward. The timeline of the response, including when help arrived and what was attempted at the scene, was was not fully detailed in public reporting. He could not be saved. He was 22 years old. He died of strangulation. The flag he had been wearing to celebrate his country's greatest footballing night killed him before the night was over. High-tension flag. The World Cup's reach extends far beyond the nations that qualify to play in it. In Bangladesh, the tournament generates a national division between supporters of Argentina and supporters of Brazil. This division is not casual. It is a defining cultural event every 4 years, and it manifests visually. The primary method of demonstrating support is the raising of flags. Fans attempt to raise the flag of their chosen nation higher than the flags of their neighbors. To achieve this height, supporters scale available structures. Rooftops, trees, and public utility poles become points of elevation. In June of 2018, days before the tournament in Russia began, a 13-year-old boy in Bangladesh attempted to raise an Argentina flag. To secure the highest possible position, he scaled a structure near local power lines. He used a metal pole to hoist the fabric. Public safety campaigns and local authorities routinely issue warnings regarding the proximity of power lines. The dangers of high-voltage electricity are not hidden. They are documented, signposted, and universally understood. The warnings dictate that individuals must maintain strict clearance from live utility infrastructure, particularly when handling conductive materials. Those warnings were ignored. The desire to elevate the flag overrode the established safety protocols of the environment. As he raised the metal pole, it made contact with the live high-tension electrical wire. The electrocution was immediate. The current passed through the metal pole and into his body. The human nervous system cannot withstand high-voltage electrical transfer. The contact generated an instantaneous shock that threw him from his elevated position. He fell to the ground. Local residents who witnessed the strike transported him to a medical facility. The timeline of the transport and the specific emergency interventions attempted upon arrival were documented by local authorities. He was declared dead at the hospital. He was 13 years old. He died because the impulse to participate in the visual celebration of a tournament occurring thousands of miles away caused him to bypass fundamental safety warnings and bring conductive metal into contact with a live electrical current. The flag he was attempting to raise fell with him. Munich, stand fall. In June of 2025, Munich hosted the Nations League final. The Nations League, UEFA's senior international competition below the World Cup and European Championship, had reached its concluding match, and Munich's stadium was packed for the occasion. A final carries a particular atmosphere that group stage or qualifying matches do not. Both sets of supporters arrive knowing the result will be definitive. There is no second chance, no next fixture to recover in. The tension accumulates differently. It sits higher in the crowd. The match went to extra time. After 90 minutes, the two teams had not been separated. The additional 30 minutes of play extended the tension rather than resolving it. Crowds in extra time behave differently from crowds in normal time. People are on their feet more consistently. The emotional pressure that has been building for the full match and through the break before extra time reaches its most concentrated form. The second tier of the main stand held spectators who had been through all of that before the incident occurred. During extra time, a spectator in the second tier of the main stand fell. He went over the edge and came down onto the seating below. The second tier of a main stand in a stadium of that size sits at significant height above the lower seating. The impact of landing on the seating structure rather than on a clear surface did not reduce the severity of what had happened. The precise cause of the fall was not confirmed in public reporting. Whether he had moved too close to the edge, lost his footing on the steps or the seating area, or whether some other factor contributed, was not established and confirmed publicly. What was confirmed is that he fell from the second tier and landed below. Medical staff inside the stadium responded. The response took place in the stand, visible to the spectators around the incident, during a live match in extra time. Resuscitation was attempted. The specific details of what was tried and how long the attempt continued were not fully disclosed in public reporting. He could not be revived. The exact cause of death was not specified beyond the consequences of the fall. He died in the stand. Whether the match was paused during the response was not confirmed in the available reporting. He could not be revived. The Nations League final continued to its conclusion in Munich in June of 2025, and a man in the second tier of the main stand did not leave the stadium alive. The own goal. Sometimes the danger of watching the World Cup creates a lethal obsession that follows the participants home. The 1994 World Cup in the United States carried unprecedented expectations for the Colombian national team. They had qualified brilliantly. They were considered tournament favorites. Back in Colombia, the atmosphere surrounding the team was intensely pressured, complicated by the heavy influence of betting syndicates and cartels invested in the team's success. On the 22nd of June, 1994, Colombia played the United States in Pasadena. In the 34th minute, Colombian defender Andrés Escobar attempted to intercept a cross. He stretched for the ball. It deflected off his boot and rolled past his own goalkeeper. An own goal. Colombia lost the match 2-1 and were subsequently eliminated from the tournament. The emotional response to a World Cup elimination is typically confined to disappointment. In this context, it escalated into a documented threat to life. Escobar returned to Medellin, Colombia. On the 1st of July, he went out to a local venue. In the early hours of the following morning, he walked to his car in the parking lot. He was approached by individuals who had recognized him. The altercation began verbally. It centered specifically on the mistake he had made on the pitch in Pasadena. The own goal was the explicit subject of the confrontation. The confrontation escalated. A weapon was drawn. He was shot 6 times. Emergency responders were contacted and arrived at the parking lot. He was transported to a hospital, but the damage inflicted by 6 close-range ballistic impacts was catastrophic. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. He was 27 years old. He was a professional athlete who had made a structural error during a football match. The tension of the World Cup, combined with the volatility of the environment he returned to, transformed a sporting mistake into a capital offense. He died because the people who watched him play could not separate the game on the screen from reality. Penalty shootout heart. The 2014 World Cup was held in Brazil. For the host nation, the tournament carried a pressure that visiting teams did not feel. Brazil had not won on home soil in the modern era of the competition, and the expectation placed on the squad by the country's supporters was visible in every match they played. The round of 16 brought Brazil against Chile, and after 90 minutes, the match had not been decided. Extra time followed. After 120 minutes, it had still not been decided. It went to a penalty shootout. A penalty shootout at a World Cup is one of the most concentrated stress events in sport. For the fans watching, it is 5 kicks, potentially more, each one capable of ending everything. There is nothing to do but watch. No amount of support changes the outcome once the goalkeeper and the penalty taker are set. The crowd watches, and the body responds to that watching in measurable ways. A 69-year-old Brazilian fan was watching the match in a bar. He had been there through the full course of the match, through extra time, and into the shootout. The bar would have been filled with other supporters, the same tension present for everyone in the room. He was 69 years old. He suffered a heart attack during the penalty shootout. He was treated. Emergency services were contacted and responded. He did not recover at the scene. He died 2 hours after the heart attack. What makes this death statistically significant beyond the individual is what was documented around it. During that single match, the Brazil versus Chile penalty shootout on that day in June of 2014, health officials treated as many as 98 people for various medical issues. 98 people in connection with one football match. Not across a season, not across a tournament. On one afternoon, during one penalty shootout, the 69-year-old man was one of 98 people whose bodies reacted severely enough to require medical attention during a single World Cup match. He was the one who did not survive it. He died of a cardiac event 2 hours after it struck him, while watching his country play in a penalty shootout at a World Cup on home soil. Spain-Netherlands collapse. The 2014 World Cup group stage opened with a match that carried the weight of history. Spain against the Netherlands was not simply a group fixture. It was a rematch of the 2010 World Cup final played 4 years earlier in Johannesburg, where Spain had won 1-0 in extra time through an Andrés Iniesta goal. Spain were the reigning world champions. They had also won 2 consecutive European championships. In 2008 and 2012, they were the dominant international football force of their era. The Netherlands had reached that 2010 final and had come within a single goal of winning it. When the two sides met in the 2014 group stage, the anticipation was built on everything that had preceded it. It was, by almost every measure, the marquee match of the opening round of the tournament. Supporters of both nations had waited 4 years for this specific fixture. A 51-year-old Chinese fan was watching the match. China was not a participant in the 2014 World Cup, but the tournament reached Chinese audiences through television broadcasts, and the Spain versus Netherlands fixture drew viewers well beyond the two nations directly involved. He was watching the match when he died suddenly. The specific mechanism of his death was confirmed as sudden, but no further clinical detail was confirmed in the available public reporting. The exact cause of death, the location beyond China broadly, and whether he was alone or with others were not confirmed in the reporting available. He died suddenly while watching Spain versus Netherlands at the 2014 World Cup. He was 51 years old. Exact cause was not publicly disclosed in detail beyond the confirmed fact of sudden death. Screen still on. The 2014 World Cup was held in Brazil, which sits in a time zone that placed matches during reasonable local hours for South American viewers. For Chinese viewers, the situation was the opposite. Brazil is 11 to 13 hours behind China depending on the region and the time of year. A match played at a standard evening kickoff in Brazil broadcasts in China in the early hours of the morning, anywhere from 1 in the morning to 5 in the morning depending on the kickoff time. Watching a World Cup held in the Americas live from China means staying up through the night. It means giving up sleep for matches. For dedicated supporters, this is not unusual. Every World Cup held in a distant time zone produces the same pattern. Millions of people in affected regions accepting disrupted sleep as the cost of watching matches live rather than catching recorded results afterward. The 2014 World Cup was particularly demanding for Chinese viewers because of the time difference involved. A 25-year-old man was one of those viewers. He had been staying up to watch World Cup matches through the night. At some point after a night of watching, he died. He was found in his bedroom. His computer was still on. The screen was still running. Who found him and at exactly what time was not confirmed in the available reporting. The exact cause of his death was also not confirmed publicly. Whether it was connected to sleep deprivation, to a pre-existing condition, or to some other factor was not established in the reporting available. What was confirmed is the image that defined the discovery. A 25-year-old man in his bedroom, dead, with his computer still on and the screen still running. The World Cup had been playing on that screen through the night. By the time he was found, the match had already ended. He was 25 years old. Exact cause of death was not publicly disclosed. Viewing parties strike. For millions of fans, watching the World Cup is a communal act. The matches are events that draw people together into shared spaces. Bars, public squares, and sports clubs become temporary hubs of collective attention. On the 11th of July, 2010, the World Cup final was played between Spain and the Netherlands. The tournament was hosted in South Africa, but the broadcast reached across the continent and the globe. In Kampala, Uganda, hundreds of fans gathered at the Kaidondo Rugby Club. The venue had set up large screens. The crowd was dense, focused entirely on the broadcast of the final. They were there to watch football. The density of that gathering, created entirely by the gravity of the World Cup final, made them a target. During the second half of the match, as the crowd watched the screen, a detonator was triggered. An explosive device had been placed within the crowd. It detonated directly into the gathered spectators. Moments later, a second device detonated in another viewing area across the city. The explosion at the rugby club was devastating. The force of the blast in a packed, confined crowd produced immediate mass casualties. The act of watching the match was violently interrupted by shrapnel, overpressure, and fire. 74 people died across the coordinated attacks that night. Dozens more were critically injured. The timeline of the medical response was chaotic. Emergency services arrived at a scene defined by mass trauma, panic, and darkness. The people who died in Kampala that night had no connection to the political or ideological motivations of the attackers. Their only connection to the event was their decision to gather in a public space to watch the final match of the 2010 World Cup. The tournament created the congregation. The congregation created the vulnerability. 74 people went out to watch Spain play the Netherlands, and they never saw the end of the match. Montpellier Street collision. In December 2022, France played Morocco in the World Cup semi-final. The match carried immense historical and cultural weight for both nations. When the match concluded with a French victory, the streets of cities across France filled with overlapping crowds of celebrating French supporters and disappointed Moroccan fans. In the city of Montpellier, the street environment became highly volatile. A white vehicle was navigating through the crowd. Fans began to swarm the vehicle, and someone attempted to forcefully remove a flag hanging from its window. The driver panicked. Instead of halting, the driver executed a sudden, rapid U-turn to escape the crowd. The maneuver was blind and violent. A 14-year-old boy was standing in the immediate path of the accelerating vehicle. He was struck directly. The impact was severe. The vehicle did not remain at the scene. The boy was transferred to the hospital in critical condition, requiring immediate emergency intervention for massive trauma. The medical teams could not stabilize him. He died from the injuries sustained in the collision. He was 14 years old. He was caught in the chaotic aftermath of a World Cup semi-final. The volatile mix of crowd behavior, vehicular traffic, and the heightened emotions of the tournament created an environment where a sudden panic response ended his life on a city street. Munich cardiac wave. In 2006, Germany hosted the World Cup. It was the first time the tournament had been held in Germany since 1974, and the country embraced it with a visibility and enthusiasm that drew significant international attention. The streets of host cities were decorated. Public viewing areas were established. The population engaged with the tournament at a scale that transformed the atmosphere of the country for the duration of the competition. Munich was one of the host cities. It is the home of Bayern Munich, one of the most supported clubs in German football, and its population carried an intensity of football attachment that exceeded even the general German enthusiasm for the sport. When Germany played, Munich watched. Researchers tracked what happened in Munich on the days Germany played during that 2006 tournament. They measured cardiac emergency admissions, the number of people requiring emergency medical attention for heart-related events, and they compared those figures against baseline rates. On days when Germany played, cardiac emergency admissions rose by 266%, 266% above normal. Not a modest increase, not a statistical fluctuation, a rise of more than 2.5 times the baseline number, recorded consistently on match days across the tournament. The more tense the match, the more pronounced the spike. The figure entered the medical literature as documented evidence of what large-scale sporting events do to population-level cardiac risk. Germany was not unique. The same pattern had been observed elsewhere in earlier tournaments. When England lost on penalties to Argentina in the 1998 World Cup, UK hospital admissions for cardiac events rose by a quarter compared to baseline. One match, one afternoon, one penalty shootout, and a measurable share of an entire nation's population required emergency medical attention at a rate 25% above normal. The Brazil 2014 data reinforced it further. 98 people treated for medical issues during a single penalty shootout. That figure, drawn from one city's emergency services during one match, was consistent with what the Munich and UK data had already established across different countries, different tournaments, and different years. The World Cup does not only carry risk for people inside stadiums, it carries risk for people in bars and living rooms, and in any space where a serious match is being watched by someone whose cardiovascular system responds to stress in the way that human cardiovascular systems do. For a measurable percentage of that audience, the response is severe enough to require medical intervention. For a smaller percentage within that group, the intervention does not succeed. The 266% figure from Munich is not an outlier. It is a data point in a pattern that has been confirmed across multiple tournaments, multiple countries, and multiple decades. Every time a World Cup match goes to a penalty shootout, a population-level cardiac event is already beginning in the stands, in the bars, and in the homes of the people watching. Watching becomes lethal. The 1998 World Cup was held in France. England qualified and advanced through the group stage to the round of 16, where they faced Argentina in Saint-Étienne on the 30th of June, 1998. The match had already produced 2 penalties, 2 disallowed goals, a red card for David Beckham, and a goal of significant technical quality before it reached its conclusion. It went to a penalty shootout. England lost. Paul Ince and David Batty missed their penalties. Argentina advanced. England were eliminated. For English football supporters, it was one in a sequence of penalty shootout exits that had defined the national team's tournament history across multiple competitions over several years. In the hours and days that followed, UK hospitals recorded what their data showed. Heart attack admissions on the day England lost to Argentina on penalties were a quarter higher than baseline. 25% more people in the United Kingdom suffered cardiac events serious enough to require hospital treatment on that specific day compared to the normal rate. The match was watched by millions of people simultaneously. When a penalty shootout reaches its decisive kicks, those millions are all receiving the same stress stimulus at the same moment. The body responds to witness threat in physiologically measurable ways. Blood pressure rises, heart rate increases. For people with pre-existing cardiovascular vulnerability, the combination of prolonged tension and acute stress at the moment of the decisive kick can push a system past the point it can manage. A quarter more heart attacks on one day because of one football match. By 2006 in Munich, the same researchers who studied the England data had a new data set to work with, 266% above normal on Germany match days. The figure was larger because Germany were playing at home, in front of their own population, in a tournament held in their own country. The emotional intensity was correspondingly higher. The cardiac response was correspondingly higher. By 2014 in Brazil, the pattern was visible in real time. 98 people treated during a single penalty shootout. The 69-year-old man who did not survive was one of 98 in one city during one match. Extrapolated across the full viewership of that match across Brazil alone, the total number of people whose bodies reacted severely enough to require medical attention that afternoon was substantially higher than what any single city's emergency services could record or report. 3 tournaments, 3 countries, 3 separate data sets. The same pattern in all of them. The World Cup is not simply a sporting event watched passively by its audience. For a portion of that audience, the act of watching triggers a physiological response severe enough to end their life. The data does not name the people who died in those spikes. It counts them. It expresses them as percentages above baseline, as admissions per match day, as the number requiring treatment during a single 90-minute period of football. Behind each of those percentages is a person who was alive before kickoff and was not alive by the final whistle. The World Cup returns every 4 years. The data says it will happen again. It has happened at every tournament for which records have been examined. There is no indication that the pattern is changing. Celebration turns fatal. Every story in this video is a variant of the same thing. A person is watching the World Cup, or celebrating the World Cup, or staying up for the World Cup, and they die. Not in war, not in a disaster, not from illness that arrived independently of the tournament. They die because of what the World Cup does to the bodies and the behavior of the people who love it most. A man in Mexico City dies before kickoff because the combination of intoxication and stadium architecture produces a fall no one survives. A 13-year-old in Bangladesh ignores electrical warnings to raise a flag and is electrocuted. A 22-year-old in Argentina dies because a flag worn in celebration catches in a wheel, and the physics of fabric and momentum are indifferent to the occasion. A man in Munich dies in the second tier of a stand during extra time of a final, the exact moment when crowd emotion is at its highest concentration. A 27-year-old Colombian defender is murdered in a parking lot by an unhinged fan consumed by the tournament's outcome. A 69-year-old in Brazil watches a penalty shootout and his heart gives out. A 51-year-old in China watches Spain versus the Netherlands and dies suddenly without a confirmed explanation. A 25-year-old in China is found dead in his bedroom with his screen still on. 74 people in Uganda gather to watch a final and are killed in a coordinated explosion. A 14-year-old in France is struck by a fleeing vehicle during chaotic post-match street crowding. These are not random deaths that happen to coincide with the tournament. In each case, the World Cup was the context. The match was the occasion. The fall, the flag, the crowded bar, the overnight vigil. These are things the World Cup creates. The tournament generates the conditions in which these deaths become possible. The cardiac data makes this explicit. 266% above normal in Munich. 25% above normal in the UK on the day England lost to Argentina. 98 people treated during one penalty shootout in Brazil. These are not coincidences expressed as numbers. They are a documented relationship between the act of watching the World Cup and the act of dying. Stadiums are structures, and structures have edges and heights and drops. And when the people inside them reach states of intoxication or peak emotional arousal, the gap between standing safely and falling becomes smaller than it should be. A high-stakes stadium environment can mirror the absolute limit of the World Cup, where a man falling from the second tier of the main stand is killed by the same combination of height, emotion, and architecture that has appeared in this video's other stories. The pattern is not unique to the World Cup. It is visible wherever large crowds gather to watch high-stakes football in tiered venues. Celebration carries its own separate risk. Streets filled with motorcycles and flags and people in states of collective joy are not safe environments. The 22-year-old in Argentina was not behaving unusually for that night. Thousands of people were doing what he was doing. He was the one for whom it went wrong, and the mechanism that killed him, a flag catching in a rear wheel, was present for every other rider who wore a flag that night. It did not catch in most of their wheels. It caught in his. The World Cup is the most watched one-night sporting event on Earth. Billions of people follow it. Tens of thousands attend matches in person. Millions more watch in bars, in public squares, and at home. The deaths in this video are drawn from those millions. They are not aberrations in a generally safe experience. They are the end of a distribution that exists because the tournament exists, and because the emotions the tournament produces are real, physical, measurable forces acting on real, physical, mortal bodies. The tournament will return. The crowds will fill the stands. The penalty shootouts will come. The cardiac admissions data will be collected again, and it will show the same spike it showed in Munich in 2006, and in the UK in 1998, and in Brazil in 2014. The fans will wear their flags. Some of them will ride motorcycles through celebrating streets. The World Cup does not know who it will take next. It only ensures that it will take someone. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.